I'd love to keep this thing, but we're going to give it to one of you. So this one is our entry into the Make a Wood Sign Tribe Exchange. There's a Facebook page called Make a Wood Sign Tribe. We're doing a sign exchange. Carmen and Bob are actually hooking this thing up. In July, they're going to be pairing people up and they'll be exchanging signs. This is our entry into that. The deadline is the end of June, so you don't have that much time, but definitely go check that out and enter, and you could actually get this sign or one of the other really cool signs from one of the tribe members. We're just excited that we get to participate in this, make something really cool, and get something really cool from somebody else. So guys, everything that we're using today will be in links in the description below. Go over to the website, check them out. And in case you guys didn't know, we don't really have paid sponsors. Our business is completely funded by you guys going over to the website to buy supplies. We've got thousands of products over there. So if you guys could go over to makeawoodsign.com, check it out, see if you need anything, we sure appreciate it. So that's what this one is all about. Let's get started.
For this sign, we used 5/4 inch knotty alder. Now, Dad said he is not 100% sure if he's carved this stuff before. I know I never have. We put this board together a while back for another project, but it just didn't work out. So what we wanted to do is have an arched line up top and a flat line in the bottom, and then put a picture of our router in the middle. Now, we couldn't find any good artwork on a router, so what we ended up doing is taking a picture of our DeWalt with our base plate on it, and then using Rapid Resizer to turn it into a line drawing. Now, this doesn't work all the time. It has to be the right picture, and I didn't show it on here because it took me forever and I couldn't explain it. I probably couldn't even do it again if I tried. So it was just kind of dumb luck that it worked out. Now, to do an arched line, really it's pretty simple, especially if you have our arches, which I will put a link in the description below for everything we use today. You just want to make sure that it's not cockeyed, so you want to measure side to side and top to bottom to make sure that's exactly where you want it to be. Now for the picture, we're going to actually use carbon paper, so we had to block that area off while Dad sprayed. Now the carbon paper is kind of an old way of doing this, but it actually works really well, and for the line drawing like this is, I think it worked a lot better than trying to do an inkjet transfer. That way you could pick and choose what lines you want to have on there, and it turned out really good.
Hey guys, quick second. In case you guys don't know, we're trying to hit a huge goal this year of hitting 100,000 subscribers by December 31st. If you guys could do us a solid, hit that subscribe button and the like button. Click the little bell icon so you get notified. We've got thousands of videos and it's all free. It's all for you guys. We're just asking, hit that little button. We sure appreciate it.
The first bit we're using for this sign is our carving liner bit at 1/8 of an inch deep. Now this is a fine detail bit, so you really don't want to go any deeper than 1/8 of an inch per pass. Because this is only a single flute bit and it's got a really sharp point, if you go much deeper than that, especially in hardwoods, you take the risk of breaking the tip off. Not only does that suck because you broke your bit, it can also be really dangerous. So when you have a piece of artwork like this where it's just all real small single lines, it can be kind of tricky, right? Because you're thinking, okay, am I supposed to carve the line away? Am I supposed to stay on one side or the other? Well, this is going to be outset. So for the outside line, the whole profile of the router, Dad's going to stay on the outside of the line. But when it comes to carving the lines that are on the inside, he's pretty much going to split the difference and try to make that line disappear as he's carving it away. Where you have to be careful of is if there's two small lines that are close together. You have to be able to kind of adjust as you go to make sure that you don't make one big line where there should be two small lines. So remember, especially when it comes to artwork, you have some wiggle room. You just need a little bit of experience to kind of figure out exactly what you're supposed to do in what situation. The next bit we're using is our profile bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now you can see where I dropped in on the A right there. These are 1.5 inch letters. So there's some sharp points on the A and the K and the M. different things like that. You don't have to take all of the black away. And that's something I think a lot of new people kind of get confused about. They think that because the outline shows it, that if you don't carve it, it's going to look really funky when it's all said and done. But that's not necessarily the case. For me, when I'm doing the A or the M, there's little pieces of the tips that are still left on there. Now they're going to get sanded off, so it's not a big deal. I just don't want to try to make such a sharp point that it's not going to carve deep enough to where it'll still be there after all the sanding is done. So keep in mind that as you're carving, this is all up to you. It's all in how you want to do it. Now I could have taken the carving liner and gone in there and got all the sharp points a little bit sharper, but I don't think it's necessary. It really doesn't matter, especially if you're carving on site or you're in a time crunch. Let's say somebody ordered 10 signs and they want them done in 2 days or something like that. You want to be able to knock this stuff out in a fairly rapid pace, especially if you're carving for money. So that's just something to keep in mind. Just because the line is there doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take every single little bit of it out. Now, if you're carving in real hardwood, or maybe you're pretty new and you're having a hard time keeping a straight line, remember, you can always start shallower. So if that's an issue you're having, start at say maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then you can always come back and do it deeper. It's a lot easier to keep a straight line when you start shallow. The next bit I'm using is our little 1/8 inch spiral upcut at 1/4 of an inch deep. Now, what I normally do if we're doing an outset sign is that we'll do the initial profile at 3/16 and then we'll come back and drop it to 1/4 of an inch. But we're going to take everything on this board away except for what we carved. So what I'm doing here is I'm going around all my carving with that little 1/8 inch bit, and I'm going to give myself a bunch of room. And I'm also going to go and make everything inside the letters flat. And I'm starting this with the 1/8 inch because the 1/4 inch bit is twice the thickness, so it's a lot harder to get inside those small areas. So taking it step by step, it's a little bit more time consuming, but in the end it's actually going to save you time because you're not going to have to go back and get stuff that you couldn't get because you went with a bigger bit to start out with. The next bit we're using is our 1/4 inch spiral upcut bit, and we're doing this at 1/4 of an inch deep. So there's kind of two steps here. The first step is Dad's going to go around all of the lettering and the artwork, and he's going to carve all that away to make sure that there's plenty of room to get in there with our Fordham and with the die grinder that we're going to do the power carving with. The second step is he's going to take all of the wood and drop it down to 1/4 of an inch deep. Now, that's not 100% necessary. You can do that with the power carving, whether you're using a grinder or whether you're using the Fordham or whatever it is you're using. However, that takes quite a bit longer. Now, when we do this, we like to have a really deep carve. We like there to be a lot of contrast in it. So we're going to drop all of this wood down and then we're going to go in and power carve. Now, if you do something like this in the wrong steps, it's going to get kind of tricky. You'll notice Dad's working from the outside in, and the main reason he's doing that is to make sure that there's plenty of wood up top for him to be able to rest his base plate on. If you work from the inside out, then by the time you get away from all of the wording and the artwork, you're not going to have any wood left to put your base plate on. So just try to plan this out, which is what we did. We talked about it and figured this was probably the best way to do it, and it worked out great. We do have a 12-inch base plate that helps with something like this, but if you don't have that and you just have our 6-inch base plate, working from the outside in will almost guarantee that you have enough room to be able to get all your carving done before you run out of wood. For the little details in the power carving, we're going to use the Fordham with a little fine flame burr. And what we're doing here is we're going to go in between the letters and inside the letters and make sure there's a good texture in there. The tricky part of this is, number one, not hitting your letters. You can see as Dad's going inside that A, he tries to keep that thing as straight up and down as possible, because as soon as you start turning, then you start gouging out your letters. That sucks. We've done it. You want to avoid that if you can. But the other challenge is trying to make the texture match. So when I go to the big burr that I'm going to do all of the outside stuff with, I'm trying to match that texture as much as possible. But you can see Dad's going in and giving everything inside all of those small little areas as much texture as you can. Once that's done, he's going to switch to a little ball burr, and he's going to go around the outside of everything. So he's working his way from the inside out again. And he's going to make sure that there's no flat spots. So the inside texture is going to blend into that outside texture, and then when I go in and do my part with the die grinder, I'm going to try to blend that texture into this. So again, it's working in steps. And the main reason for that is just because there's small areas and you don't want to mess up your carving. That is the worst. So now once all the detail texture was done, I'm going to use the extreme coarse flame burr from Kutzall. So all of the burrs that we use, our burrs, our shaping discs, whatever you call them, they're all from Kutzall. There's other companies out there, but we really like this stuff. They seem to hold up extremely well, even in hardwoods. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through, and basically my whole goal is to get rid of any flat spots. I didn't necessarily have an idea for what texture I was looking for. I just wanted to make sure there was nothing flat left in there by the time I'm done. And it worked out well. And using the two same flame type burrs, even though they're different sizes, I was able to blend those textures in really well. Now, to get rid of a lot of those rough lines, I used this flat disc sander from Klingspor, and man, it worked great. But one thing you want to make sure is that you crank your drill up. So this is on the second gear and the turbo's on it, and it really kind of softens that look a little bit, and it takes a lot of those really deep lines out of there. We wanted to make a frame around the outside, so what we did is we used the same wood that we made the sign out of, this knotty alder, and we cut a 28-inch piece, and then we ripped 4 half-inch pieces off of that. Dad and I are far from framers or fine woodworking carpenters, anything like that. So to make this frame, we just kind of marked where these things should go and then cut 45-degree angles and hope for the best. We didn't show a whole lot of how we did it because it took us way longer than it probably would take any of you guys, and it's a little embarrassing how bad we are at it. But luckily, it ended up working out. One little tip I can give you is make sure you dry fit your pieces before you glue and nail them on. Because if you don't and one of them is off 1/4 of an inch, that's going to throw the entire look of your sign off or your frame. One option you have instead of building a frame around your sign is that you could carve a border out and leave that the same height as all of your carving. The problem with that is when you're doing your power carving, it makes it really difficult to try to get inside those corners without nicking the vertical part of your border. So we figured, you know what, we'll just power carve it and then we'll build a frame around it. I think the final product looks much better because there's no risk of hitting it with a power carving, and it was probably a little faster too. Now these things here are amazing. They're called fill sticks. Dad's had them for a few years, so I'll try to put a link below if I can find them. But basically use them like a color crayon. If there's gaps in your frames, they're just wax sticks that you match to the grain of your board, and then you kind of just color inside the gaps. I was a little skeptical, but Dad was messing around with them the other day, and man, they freaking work great. I was really impressed, not only with how easy it is to fill, but with how well that the different colors match. So once it's all filled, then Dad took his card scraper from Faith Valley Tools and he scraped a lot of that stuff off and then sanded it with a really fine sanding sponge. So it's kind of waxy, and if you leave that on, you don't scrape it off and sand, I think when you put a finish on it, it's really going to show up. Now that everything's carved, everything's put together, it's all filled, Dad's going to take his random orbital sander with a 120 grit disc, and he's going to make sure to sand all of the extra spray off of the letters, and also he's going to soften up the corners. He's going to soften up the edges and all the corners just to give it a good finished look. One other thing we did that for some reason I didn't record is I sanded off the back to make sure that that's flat and there's no glue drops sticking out of the back. Once that's all done, then we put a clear coat on it. Now we only showed one clear coat, but we actually ended up putting about 15 coats on it, and my gosh, once it had the buildup, this grain is beautiful. I'm really looking forward to using Knotty Alder for some more projects. Now Dad and I debated about whether we should paint this sign or not. And so we kind of came up with the idea of let's paint the router, but we're going to leave the letters natural color. And I'm glad we ended up doing that. I think if we wouldn't have painted the router, then it would have just kind of blended into the background a little bit too much. So this yellow and the black really popped, and also it shows that it's a DeWalt. It's not exactly DeWalt yellow, but you know, you guys get the idea. So the rule we use for color is if we're going to use paint, we put all the clear coat on first. That way if there's any drips or anything, we can just clean it off and it won't soak into the wood. If we're going to use felt pens, then we do the color first and put the clear coat on after so it does soak into the wood.
Really happy with the way this one came out. We just had a blast making it, did some really interesting stuff. So don't forget, the sign exchange deadline is coming up June 30th. Definitely go and check out the Make a Wood Sign Tribe page over on Facebook. Connect up with Carmen or Bob Stratford and get all the details. But one of you guys is gonna win this thing. All right guys, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.